No, we are not. It still says waiting for Thinkers Club.
Okay. So do let me know.
We are live.
We are live?
We are live.
Okay. So
No. We are live right now. It will connect to your site. Might depend on your internet speed also. I can see it on YouTube.
okay. I mean, I am. I guess since you are responsible, that bit I'm not really looking into. I'm sure that is working. I guess we can start off our session, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on which part of the world you are in. Welcome to this webinar on climate change, initiated by the Thinkers Club, Nistarini College, and the Climate Reality Project. A bit about Thinkers Club before we get going. About 2 years ago, a few of us who coincidentally happened to be from the same batch of Presidency College decided to come together and start a group which we very grandiosely decided to call the Thinkers Club. One of the key endeavors of this group was to encourage the exchange of ideas on diverse subjects. This would include, but not be necessarily restricted to the humanities and arts, social and natural sciences, as well as issues which are relevant to our times. Our platform welcomes individuals with diverse backgrounds because we come from diverse backgrounds, who could be academics, bureaucrats, industry practitioners, and creative artists. And we all want to kind of collaborate and get their views through various channels, such as blogs, publications, seminars, and webinars. So while this was our game plan, we started with a blog, and why we already have a Thinkers Club blog, which as we speak has clocked more than 100 contributions. And that's very encouraging. And we would obviously like more contributors to enrich the blog with their contributions. This, incidentally, is the first webinar we have organized. And I must thank, Nistarini College as well as the Climate Social Forum for agreeing to kind of collaborate with us. So in keeping with our objective of having discussions that would resonate with everyone, specialists as well as people who have interdisciplinary interests, we chose a topic that is at once a global talking point and a subject of everyday conversation, which is climate change. Now, while we have decided to call this session climate change, climate change is a catch-all phrase, and it means different things to different people, right? And like Margaret Atwood, we believe that it may be limiting, and instead, perhaps it should be called everything change. Since the change in climate is systematic, has been happening over centuries, and touches every aspect of animal and human life on Earth. So it is not simply about global warming or toxic air quality. It is not simply about toxic air quality. It is not simply about carbon-led capitalism. It is simply not about species extinction, or it's simply not about rising sea levels. I mean, as we have seen, as I was mentioning, climate change has impacted us and human civilization in many ways, which also, unfortunately, has led to the extinction of civilizations like the Harappan and Mayan civilization, among others. And therefore, climate change, if we are to look at it today, is a rather uh, immense problem or issue, which we need to address from various, I would say, approaches, and they have societal, economic, as well as political implications. Uh, and therefore, there is a tendency sometimes, somewhat to, and there is no harm actually to intellectualize the problem as if it's the absolute property of think tanks. uh, it may not be. And in my support, I'll have to kind of quote author Roy Scranton, who, in his provocative book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, says very, very provocatively that, admittedly, ocean acidification, social upheaval, and species extinction are problems that humanities scholars, with their taste for fine grained philological analysis, esoteric debates, might seem remarkably ill suited to address. After all, how will thinking about Kant or Franz Fanon help us to trap carbon dioxide? Now, all this is a bit of dark humor, but I guess the point being made is that, the problem is too large and intractable to be kind of, only be restricted to forums as such. And there are, we have to kind of reach out to the wider, community as such, which includes the civil society, among others. Because honestly, climate change means changing how we think about pretty much everything: wealth, power, joy, time, space, nature, what constitutes a good life. And you know uh, recognizing the reality of climate breakdown means recognizing the interconnectedness of things. And that is something which we, I think, need to approach this issue. And therefore, as I said, that the groundswell has to kind of come from the top as well as from the bottom. And we also have to recognize that there is no one single solution, but we have to kind of take incremental steps which are already being taken across the globe. And that's something which is very encouraging. Having said that, we also have to kind of have the spirit of, I would say, cautious optimism when we approach uh, us to address this issue. And in that, I would kind of like to, echo Greta Thunberg's kind of approach when she says that we must have cathedral thinking, where we build the foundations without exactly knowing how the ceiling will look at. Right. And I think that's one of the most pragmatic lines I've heard. Of course, there are others. So, with that, I would like to kind of, hand it over to the principal of Nistarini College, Indrani Dev, who has, been kind enough to kind of uh, uh, help us to collaborate and set up this webinar. And then we will kind of jump into the sessions. Indrani, over to you.
Thank you. On behalf of Nistarini College, I wish to welcome.
You're on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf
On
of
behalf of
Nistarini
Nistarini
College,
College,
I would
I would
first
first
like to
like to
welcome
welcome
our
our
three
three
main
main
speakers today:
speakers today:
Domenico
Domenico Vito
from the
from the
Climate
Climate
Social
Social
Forum,
Forum,
Mr.
Mr.
Gautam
Gautam
Bhattacharya,
Bhattacharya,
and
and
Mr.
Mr.
Shekhar
Shekhar
Dashgupta,
Dashgupta,
both of
both of
whom
whom
are,
are,
I will
I will
consider them
consider
from
them
the
from the
Thinkers Club.
Thinkers Club.
A
A
detailed
detailed
introduction to them
introduction to them
will
will
be
be
given
given
later.
later.
I
I
also
also
welcome to
welcome
this
to this
webinar
webinar
all the
all the
teaching
teaching
staff
staff
of
of
Nistarini
Nistarini
College
College
who have
who have
joined us
joined us
today.
today. And I
I
also
also
welcome
all
all
the
the
students,
students,
not
not only
only
from
from
Nistarini
Nistarini
College,
College, from
from
other
other
places
places
as
as
well.
well.
Because
Because
with
with
us
us
today,
today, we
we have
have representatives
from
from
all
all
over
over
the
the
world.
world. From
From Kenya,
Kenya, we
we have
have representatives
from
from
three
three
organizations:
organizations:
Community
Community
Forest
Forest
Association,
Association,
the
the
Forestry
Forestry
Club,
Club,
Lake
Lake Nukuru,
Kenya,
Kenya,
and
and the
the Climate
Climate
Focus
Focus
Group
Group
from
from
Kenya.
Kenya. We
We
also
also
have
have
a
a
representative
representative
from
from
Kyoto
Kyoto
University,
University,
Mr.
Mr.
Shomo
Shomo
Boshu,
Boshu,
who
who
comes
comes
from
from
Japan.
Japan.
And
And
we
we
also
also
have
have
with
with
us
us
representatives
representatives
from
from
the
the
Transfer
Transfer
Green
Green
World,
World,
which is
which is
an
an
international
international
body
body
of
of
many
many
representatives
representatives
from
from
many
many
countries.
countries.
We
We
have
have
all
all
of
of
them
them
with
with
us,
us,
at
at
least
least
one or
one or
two
two
representatives
representatives
from
from
these
these
organizations.
organizations.
And I
And I
thank them
thank them
all
all
for
for
being
being
with
with
us
us
today.
today. Now,
Now, the
the title
title
today,
today, the
the
topic
topic
today,
today,
is
is
climate
climate
change
change
and
and
its
its
inclusive
inclusive
mitigation.
mitigation.
The
The
word
word
inclusive
inclusive
actually
actually
includes
includes
the
the
whole
whole
of
of
human civilization.
for
For to
to
me,
me.
if
If
we
we
can't
can't
have
have
clean
clean
water,
water,
and if
and if
we
we
don't
don't
have
have
oxygen
oxygen
to
to
breathe,
breathe,
and
and
if
if
we
we
can't
can't
have a
have a
hygienic
hygienic
environment to
environment,
live in, then
then
what
what
is
is
the
the
use
use of
of
it?
anything else? Because
Because
that
that
is
is
our
our
first
first
priority.
priority. In the
In the
beginning,
beginning,
before
before
the
the
Renaissance,
Renaissance,
it
it
was
was
a
a
geocentric
geocentric
world.
world,
God
God
at
at
the
the
center
center
of the
of the
world.
world.
And
And even
even
the
the
human
human being
being
was
was
unimportant.
unimportant. God
God
was
was
all
all
important.
important.
And
And
then
then
came
came
the
the Renaissance
Renaissance with
with
its
its
humanism
humanism
and
and
also
also
the
the anthropocentrism,
anthropocentrism, which
which continued
continued till the
till the
20th
20th
century.
century.
It is
It is
as
as
if
if
the
the
whole
whole
world
world
has
has
grown
grown
up
up
around
around
man.
man.
But
But
now
now
we are
we are
talking
talking
about
about
ecocentrism.
ecocentrism.
We are
We are
talking
talking
about
about
biocentrism, which is not
biocentrism,
really
which
the
is not
same
really
thing,
the
because
same
in
thing, because in
ecocentrism we include
ecocentrism
living
we
and
include
non
living
living
and
things,
non-living
whereas
things,
in
whereas in
biocentrism we include
biocentrism we
only
include
the
only the
living
living
things.
things.
We
We
talk
talk
about
about
eco
eco-theology,
theology,
connecting
connecting religion
religion
with
with environment,
environment, which we
which
have
we have
had in
had in
India
India
from the
from the
ancient
ancient
times,
times,
from the
from the
Vedic
Vedic
times,
times.
in fact.
Actually,
Actually, if it is a
a
good
good
thing,
thing,
I
I think,
think, to
to
my
my
mind,
mind,
to
to connect
connect theology
theology
with
with
ecology,
ecology.
because
Because
the
the
common
common
people
people
will
will
connect
connect
with
with
it
it better.
better.
We
We have
have
environmental
environmental
ethics
ethics
also
also
nowadays.
nowadays.
We
We
talk
talk
about
about
a
a
new
new
awareness
awareness
program,
program,
the
the
value
value
of
of
all
all
living
living
things,
things,
not
not
just
just
human
human
beings,
beings,
but not
not
just
just
one
one
species.
species.
We
We
talk
talk
about
about
the
the
value
value
of
of all
all things in the
things
world, where
where
human
human
beings
beings
are
are
only
only
one
one.
part. We have to be aware now. And to
To
that
that end,
end, this is
this is
just a
just a
small
small
contribution of the
contribution
Thinkers
of
Club
the
and
Thinkers Club
Nistarini College to
to
make
make
the
the
young
young
people
people
aware
aware
of
of
the
the
changing
changing
world,
world,
to
to
make the
make the
young
young
people
people
aware
aware
of
of
their
their
role
role
in
in
preserving the
preserving.
environment. This
This
is
is
what
what
we
we
are
are
aiming
aiming
at
at.
basically.
So
So, this is
this is
just a
just a
small
small
step
step
in
in
that
that
direction.
direction,
And
and
many
many
people
people
from
from
all
all
over
over
the
the
world
world
have
have
come
come
together
together
today.
today,
And
and
we do
we do
hope
hope
that
that
we
we
can
can
give
give
at least a small message to everybody about the necessity of environmental awareness and the big problem of climate change, which has destruction at its base. We need to do a lot more than we have been doing. And we need to talk to young people so that we can think in a different direction from what we have been thinking. So now, over to Shantan again, so that we can continue with the speakers. And also, we want, and we expect a direct connection with the audience today. We want all of you to put in your inputs after every speech, and we would like the reactions of the audience after it is all over. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank you, Indrani. So, without much ado, we will start our first session, which is going to be, the first session is going to be held by Dr. Domenico Vito, who is a bioengineer who's worked in European projects in northern Italy, collaborating with the Metabolism of Cities Living Lab in San Diego. He is a member of the Italian Society of Climate Sciences, active in various environmental organizations and networks, the Climate Reality Project, and an active participant in UN Youngo. I hope I pronounced it right, the constituent of young people within the Framework Convention of Nations United, in which he takes part on various energy groups, health and agriculture, and serves as a thematic coordinator of UNEP, Major Group for Children and Youth, Microplastics and Marine Litter Working Group, and MOC LLAB, member of GACSA and promoter of the blog YouTube channel Hubzine Italia for dissemination on international negotiations and organizer of the Climate Change Symposiums and Climate Social Forum. So for the next half an hour or so, Domenico will speak on climate under convention, what the Paris Agreement tells us about mitigation. Over to you, Domenico.
Continue. So, thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to participate to this session. I can say for several reasons. First of all, for the kind invitation, and secondly, because I really appreciate the introduction that I heard. Also, relationship between different spheres of the thinking, from science to theology, anthropology, and so on. So, first of all, thank you for that, and I will start my presentation now. If I can share my screen. Okay. And also, one thing I heard that also the colleagues from Climate Reality Project are here, and so very glad to share the time with them. So, my presentation, as was mentioned, will be to frame the mitigation under the Climate Change Convention, the UN Climate Change Convention, and give some elements of reflection on what is going on at the international level relating to climate change and mitigation of climate change. Few words about the Climate Social Forum, the platform that I'm coordinating and we launched in 2020, properly to talk about a climate and social crisis and their interconnection, and also to get the possibility, as the club is doing, to talk about complex topics, but with expert, activists, and citizens in a sort of circular way. A brief about myself. I will not go that much. It was just mentioned. Actually, I'm an observer at COPE since 2015, and my main interests are related to climate change, marine litter, ICT for them, and so on. The Virtual Agora Climate Social Forum wants properly to foster these kind of dialogues between climate and social crisis and how they are interconnected. And for doing this, we are creating a sort of generative space that is based on basic principle like listen generative solution. I will show this slide because also we believe that it's important to touch upon different areas, like also theology. One of our motto is a citation of Pope Francis that with his encyclica is rediscovering the connection between religion and nature and ecology, and actually is promoting properly the concept of integral ecology. So, without further ado, I'll go a little bit fast on this. Yeah, you will find more information on our channel, but I want to start with few definitions about climate change, especially two that are given by two main bodies on international level, that are the IPCC and the UNFCCC. So you can see them. I will not read them, but the thing that you can surely see is that both of them are attributing, officially, the role of human activity to climate change. So when we're talking about climate change, climate crisis is not just a change, a variation of weather, but indeed a constant and over the natural variability change of climate conditions. So when climate is changing over the natural variability, this is climate change, and this is connected, demonstrated scientifically by human activity. And here the reconnection with the Anthropocene that we mentioned before. So when we started at the international level to talk about that, was in 1975. Was like a kind of energy crisis also at the time, and there a first group of scientists, commissioned by a club of thinker like you, the Club of Rome, decided to study if was possible to grow indefinitely into a planet with finite limits. And so they started to make this study that was called the limits of growth, based on 6 macroeconomic variables, in order to understand if this was theoretically possible. So can we grow as we are doing into a planet that is finite, that is limited? Actually, they discovered, of course, that is not possible. And if the extent of growth, the rhythm of growth was maintained as was in 1972, the result will be the collapse of the planet together with the humankind. And from that, actually, UN started to wonder about what to do with this kind of assumption. So, the first very conference about climate change was the Stockholm conference. Was not properly just climate change, but environment in general, environmental protection. There was, in fact, created the UNEP, that was then the base of another important thing at the international level, that was the IPCC. So, in fact, after the Stockholm Convention was created by a joint venture by UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization, the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is the main body that is studying the progress of and the evolution of the phenomena of climate change on a scientific level. In fact, is a group of scientists all around the world that are independent, that have, of course, their job and so on, but they have the mission to study the development and evolution of climate change phenomena. So this is actually the organization at the international structure. There are different working groups that are studying different things. The group one is dealing with the physical science on of the basis of climate change. So which is the physical reason why climate change is happening. Then the other groups are related to adaptation and vulnerability, and the group three especially about mitigation. So here we are coming to our topic. So inside the IPCC, first like contact point with the international level, we have a dedicated group that is studying mitigation of climate change. What does it mean, mitigation? It means reduction of the main causes of climate change. Which are reductions? The activity of humankind, the activity that are emitting greenhouse gases. And actually, mitigation is probably the strategy by which humankind and human community are reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, there is also inside the IPCC a task force related to measuring and register all the data related to greenhouse gas emission. And in fact, there is a special task force related to greenhouse gas inventories that is collecting all over the world the emission year by year by countries, by region, by nation, and so on. From this is starting actually the development of the international strategy on response and mitigate on climate change. But of course, this is, we can say, a scientific view, and we have to turn into the policy making view. And after the Stockholm conference that I was mentioning, like the discourse at the international level has been continued, and a turning point was in 1987 when for the first time was assessed the definition of sustainable development. So we understand that we are not in an infinite environment, we have not infinite planets, but we have to be sustainable because even though we are not granting to the future generation the possibility to satisfy their needs, because actually we are consuming the resources all in once. And so here, for the first time, after the limits of growth, that was the first study, like interrogating and questioning about the relationship between so the Anthropocene and the environment. After that, the sustainable development in 1987 was settled. And this was very interesting because was the base properly on the so-called negotiation on climate change. And here we are coming to the point. So, for the first time in 1992, all the nations around the world meet to define an international strategy, a global strategy to cope with climate change. So we understand that the Earth is limited and we have a limit in our growth. We understand that climate change is a phenomenon that is related to human activities. So it's important that at the global level, the humankind, the human activities can find together a way to respond to climate change. And was like the first Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, where the first conference of parties take place. From that, taking aquailing the definition of sustainable development, the nation has defined properly the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is like the big framework by which UN at the international level is addressing the problem of climate change. Together with that, a lot of several also outputs have come by this Earth Rio Summit in 1992. But for our sake, the very important thing is the birth of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Actually, the Framework Convention is setting non-binding targets, but is recognizing, of course, the reports of IPCC. And the IPCC came out with the first report that was still a little bit unsure about the relationship between human activities and climate change. But then finally, in 1993, they confirmed that climate change is anthropogenic related. So like the beginning of the problem of climate change starts with the activities of humankind. Actually, the UN Framework Convention was initially signed by 154 countries, but then the countries become 197 till like the current days. And actually, the UN Framework Convention, of course, is an element of the international legislation that is made by 12 articles. So I'm going quickly on see which are the basic principles by which the convention is based. Actually, I say the convention is settling the main objective to reduce the anthropogenic interference with climate system. This is the main goal of the convention. And this is the structure of the that is coming out of the convention. Of course, this is like the main body at the UN level that is taking decision about mitigation, adaptation, and the international treaty that are facing the climate change. So under this, we have like a secretariat that is managing all the organization and logistical and negotiation issues. We have the conference of parties, that is the yearly assembly by which the nation are discussing about the treaties and the agreements related to climate change. And we have a lot of several other bodies, like the scientific technological advice subsidiary bodies, the bodies for implementation, and all other commissions that in a way serve the policymaker to take decision under climate change. Also, a little focus on what is non-governmental. We saw the governmental part, the official part, but UNFCCC is also settling the importance of participation of civil society into like the process of taking decision of a global strategy on climate change. There are the constituencies of the so-called non-party stakeholders. For example, I was mentioning that I was taking part to the youth constituency. Actually, Yango, the youth constituency, is the official body that is representing youth, so a body of the civil society inside the UNFCCC. But there are several, like the local government, researchers, farmers, the indigenous people, the women and gender, and so on. All of them are interacting. Of course, they are not the ones that are taking decisions, but they are interacting with the policymakers in order properly to include civil society into all the strategies related to climate change. So I was saying the principle here in Article 3 of the Convention, we can see the principle. The UNFCCC is based on the principle of sustainable development, common differentiated responsibility. That means that every country needs to take account their efforts on solving the problem of climate change, of course considering each proper capabilities. So everyone is responsible, so nobody is out, but of course everyone needs to take efforts compared to its state of development, capabilities, and so on. And also the importance of science. Science needs to be not an excuse. So if we don't know how to act, of course, we have to not use it as an excuse. So if it's, for example, an action is important and is probable to affect the greenhouse gas emission reduction, we don't have to stay on lack of scientific certainty to act on this. On the same way, we cannot harm the environment if we don't know exactly which are the consequences of our action. So in a way, the principles are also setting the point on the scientific knowledge about the strategy that we are doing. And yeah, here another glance. Very important also the intergenerational equity, because we were talking about sustainable development, we were talking about future generation, and to grant future generation the same possibility of the current. But of course, this is not possible if there isn't intergenerational equity. So the convention is dividing into group of countries the whole world. Annex 1 are the ones that have been historically the most emitters. the one that have more responsibility in reducing greenhouse gas emission, and non-annex ones of the others that are, of course, part of the problem, but historically has emitted less for several reasons that I'm not staying here to explain. So here there are the obligation of the parties, but I want to go a little bit on the topic because from 1992 the COP saga has started. So each year under the UNFCCC convention, the global community is trying to like refine and find the best agreements in order to cope with climate change. So we started, for example, with the Kyoto Protocol. It was the first attempt to mitigate, so to reduce the emission of a certain extent, like for the time at 5.2% by 2012, was not quite a good success because finally it led to increase, all the mechanisms were led to increase the emission of 50%, so was not so effective. And for that, the next COP after the Berlin one that was settling the Kyoto Protocol, were trying to find the best agreement. And finally, like several happening has been done year by year into the COP venues, and we come out with a very important point in 2014. IPCC released this report that was warning about the necessity of finding urgent solution to stay on track with like the global warming. And in this report, they show how with the current policies, and if the country will not act, actually by 2100, temperature rise, the temperature of the planet will rise by 4.1 degrees, and this could lead to catastrophic and uncontrollable events. We are like facing right now was like even year worsened, but was important to highlight for the scientists that solution and action need to be taken. That in this framework, and also thanks to this report, was born the Paris Agreement, that is actually the current international treaty, the current international agreement by which is possible to define global strategies on mitigation and adaptation. Paris Agreement set a precise objective to stay by 2100 into 1.5 degrees of global warming. And the Paris Agreement is inviting the countries to present the so-called national determined contributions. So the strategies used by countries to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. Actually, to give you a sort of explanation with a metaphor, is something like an agreement between two friends that has been said by the doctor to stay on a certain track to let the balloon fly. So the countries need to agree globally in which kind of, I don't know, commitments they can have for diminishing or altering their weight. The weight can be like the amount of gas, that greenhouse gas that we are producing. So the commitment they have in order to let the balloon fly. And the balloon will fly only if all the countries agree to set up the objective. So the objective is 1.5 degrees. And this is actually what is happening nowadays in terms of mitigation action at the negotiation level. All the countries are recalled into the Paris Agreement to present their national determined contribution, so their strategy to mitigate and adapt to climate change every 5 years in order to improve their trajectory inside 1.5 degrees. So in order to improve the reduction of greenhouse gas emission, in order that in 2100 we are going to stay in 1.5 degrees. So this is the core of Paris Agreement. The factory is ruling the mitigation and adaptation strategy. So Under the Paris Agreement, of course, the count. This is like a country level commitment that have like a cycle of 5 years, and is like in a way confirmed and analyzed by the Secretary itself under a sort of transparency framework. So this is the global strategy, we can say, by which the humankind, the Anthropocene, is trying to reduce its impact under climate change. But there is not only this one. The Paris Agreement is also setting the possibility of private sector and civil society to contribute to this like reduction of greenhouse gas emission. In fact, is like setting under Article 6 the possibility to bilateral cooperation with countries, cooperation between countries and private sector. It's gonna settle specific funds to implement mitigation and adaptation project. So the Green Climate Fund for mitigation, the Adaptation Fund for adaptation, and actually is like a kind of project-like approach in order properly to involve even the NGOs, even the private sector, and so on, to like act under like the Paris Agreement in order to fight the climate change. It was a turning point of the negotiation, and actually, thanks to the Paris Agreement, there is the possibility to involve also the private sector. I'm going through the conclusion. Actually, I mentioned here the Talanoa dialogue, that is also something that in Climate Social Forum we really care of, because the Talanoa dialogue was probably a methodology that was given by the indigenous knowledge that actually has a great role into like defining the current strategy of mitigation and adaptation. Like this was like a current way to negotiate and a methodology to solving problem together. That is based by three questions: where we are, assess the state of art; where do we want to go, define the objective; and how do we get there. So define the main strategies and goals. This methodology, coming from the indigenous knowledge, is nowadays the official methodology that is used under negotiation to find common strategy to cope with climate change. So very important achievement also this one under the negotiation level. Last part is about properly the science and what is telling us science, which is the current state. So last year, the IPCC has released the last report, the sixth report, that is properly confirmed that climate change is causing severe alteration of environment. And that's important, and it remarks again how is important to stay in 1.5 degrees in order to avoid uncontrollable effects on the climate that is changing. So, like, even the temporary overshoot of 1.5 degrees will like cause like adverse impacts that are irreversible on a time scale. So we cannot return back. And of course, these are not compatible with the life on Earth and the life of also human communities. And these are some of the assessment and estimation that the IPCC is giving properly to suggest to countries on how to mitigate. A great role is given, for example, to the LULUCF, so the emission related to the use of soil. And the use of soil can be also the solution. Climate smart agriculture, nature-based solution, and so on are all also mentioned into the sixth assessment report as a way to effectively reduce emission and effectively use nature for cope with the problem of climate change. I'm going to the end because I think that my time is finishing. Just to say what has happened recently into the COP27. COP27 was the last COP. Unfortunately, mitigation in this case has not given a greater, we can say, progress. Actually, all the countries now they need to agree on defining like the goal to stop using fossil fuels. So this is the main achievement that we need for starting serious mitigation actions. Unfortunately, the final decision is they are not like deciding that. Article 6 was like the article that was creating like market-driven approaches to mitigate. And also one thing that I mentioned and I hand here, IPCC is defining also a new way of development. We say that like indefinite development is not possible. We passed through sustainable development, but now in the era of Anthropocene, in the era of climate change, we have to think to climate resilient development. So climate change needs to be part of the design and of thinking of our strategy to grow, to live and to exist in our cities, in our planet. So thanks for the attention. For any question, you can refer to me to this email and you can follow us on our challenges. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Domenico, for a very comprehensive session where you took us not only to the journey of the climate change initiative, but also shared the latest kind of challenges which have been been faced by forums. So I will now open it out to questions from this group, and I'm sure that there will be some questions from the viewers from the YouTube also. But first, let's look at some questions from this group itself. So, any questions? You can actually write it on the message box which is there, and yeah, please, Shomo, Somo Basu has a question, and please go ahead, Somo.
Right. Hello, Doctor. It was a lovely presentation. I'm joining from Kyoto University, Japan. So my question is, because like I'm in the academic spheres for studying the economic diversity of climate change. So in the academic spheres, we rarely consider the political contribution, right? Specifically with regards to the intended national determined contributions, the INDCs. So because INDCs are devised by countries primarily on their own, which is as opposed to the Kyoto Protocol, which had obligatory contributions that they had to do. So specifically at a point where countries are determining according to their political and economic well-being, how do we reconcile the differences from the political spheres to the realities of what is supposed to be achieved? Like, is there a path where we can, reconcile politics as well as the realities? So yeah, that's my question.
I don't know if I respond just now or let's collect a few questions. Okay, I will respond to the question. First of all, thank you very much for this question, and thank you for also getting this very important point. I could respond like this. Actually, the attempt of the Paris Agreement was in a way to improve the approach of the Kyoto Protocol that was based on obligation. No? We saw that with the obligation approach, countries are like less responsive. No, we can say they are not finalizing. We saw that the final result of the Kyoto Protocol has been the increase of 50% of emission. So, what was the approach of Paris Agreement? The approach is to work on the proactiveness of countries. To say, let's agree on a common objective, that is the 1.5 degrees, and as we agreed on a common objective, then it's your turn to design best solution on we can say a proactive way. And the thing is that the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement differs also on the point of view of development. So Kyoto Protocol is kind of we can say conservatory approach. So they want to the Kyoto Protocol want to conserve the and diminish the damage that is causing climate change. Paris Agreement is saying, look, making an ecological transition can be also an opportunity. And so let's exploit this opportunity with the strategy and ways on to cope with. All these things that of course can have the drawback that the political level can be weak in understanding this, like was given properly to overcome some limit that finally we see from the point of Kyoto Protocol. But let me say also one other thing. NDCs are not just, we can say, singular country driven, because the NDCs need to be approved at the secretariat level into a multilateral way. This pose the single national government in a way to respond not only to the internal consensus that can be the driver, for example, that let the internal politics weak and so on, but it needs to respond to the international community. And I make an example of Italy, okay, just to take the chance. Italy recently has get the election, and it's changed completely. We can say side of the barricade. So there was like the left government in a way, and then it's coming to the right government. But in terms of commitments, they do not change position because the very position were so binded by the international community that was not convenient basically to change radically and so on. Even United States with Trump, for example, they claimed to exit, but the exit was not so easy. So there are mechanisms inside the Paris Agreement in a way to protect, we can say, the multilateralism. Okay, it's not just so simple, and any country can say no, I don't want to do that. So this multilateralism and this, like the metaphor of the balloon, is properly the power of Paris Agreement that is protecting and pushing the country in a sort of virtuous cycle rather than like a constrictive cycle, as was in Kyoto Protocol. The limiting Kyoto Protocol was just pushing the countries to find a way to overcome the limit, so to masquerade their action. These the Paris Agreement push the countries to be more ambitious and demonstrate among each other that they are the best in doing that.
Thank you, Domenico, for providing the answer. And I have to say that the question posed by Shomo continues to be a challenge, and this reconciliation between political interests, economic vested interests, and the overall thrust on climate change and initiatives will continue to be a work in progress. And that's something which we all have to be kind of pragmatic to understand that it will have its pushes and pulls. But thank you so
If I
much.
get
And yeah, please go ahead.
just one other thing on this role, like unpredictably, in an unpredictable way, we can say, civil society has created a sort of push from the bottom that like with the youth movement, with the Greta movement, that was unexpected in a way into the negotiation level, that create a sort of we can say limit on the bottom to the variation and political interests and so on. So if consensus is changing on the bottom, then the politicians are seeing that. Okay.
Great. So, are there any other questions currently? So, thank you very much, Domenico. And as Domenico has shared that you can always reach out to him with questions which come up later and write to him and contact him through email. Is that right, Domenico? Thank you so much and for a wonderful session once again. And let's then move on to our next speaker. Gautam Bhattacharya is a former civil servant who worked in senior positions at the government of India for nearly 3.5 decades. Gautam studied economics in Presidency College between the years 1976-79. Before joining the civil service of the government of India, he was a researcher in the Indian Statistical Institute and taught postgraduate students of economics in 2 universities. His interest lies in public policies, economics, contemporary history, culture, and society. He writes columns in various national dailies. Gautam will provide a historical perspective tracing the evolution of the climate change initiative, highlighting the role of South Asia, particularly India's role. I have to add that his presentation seems to be additionally relevant uh, because on the 9th of March, the Australian PM Anthony Albanese mentioned that the climate challenge in the global south cannot be fought without India being central to it. So, Gautam will speak on climate change in the perspective of the developing nations. Over to you, Gautam.
Thank you, Sarantan. My job has been made particularly difficult after such a wonderful, comprehensive presentation by Dr. Domenico. Anyhow, I will be presenting the perspective of the developing nations, and I will ask myself that to what extent I was sensitized to this problem of climate change. If you ask a geologist, he will say that perhaps cyclical variations in the Earth's climate occur multiple times. It occurred multiple times, but that is from the geologist's point of view. But what we are today concerned is the climate issues which are caused by our human civilization. It's man-made climate issues and how to mitigate it. And not only how to mitigate it, how to have a inclusive mitigation, and that makes the issue particularly relevant and also particularly difficult. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
We can see the slide.
Yes. As I mentioned, that personally, how I have evolved in last 50 years as an average citizen of a developing nation. I recall 1970s when we were in college and our high school days and college days. We were concerned about the pollutions in the cities. We were concerned about. We were told that if you go to the villages, you can have a good breathing, and you cannot have that in the cities and all that. We didn't. But at that time, we had no concept. No. We were not sensitized to the issues of that global warming and all that. We didn't have even any air quality standards in those days. But the books started appearing, 3 books particularly, that 1960s and 1970s, that Silent Spring 1962 by Rachel Carson's, and then Population Bomb 1968, and the Club of Rome's The Limits to Growth 1972, which has been discussed in details by Domenico. These were the major publications that shaped the global environmental discourse in the early years. It did, but to what extent, as a citizen of of a developing nation, I was concerned. Yes, there is pollution in the cities. We knew, but I personally, in those days, in my college days, I looked at it as a problem of the West, because there were the newspaper reports of the smog in New York City. We looked pollution in the cities more a problem of the developed nations. Now, as I mentioned, that in 1960s we didn't have any air quality standards. Mostly, we didn't have any strong air quality standards. In 70s, more than 100 million vehicles filled American roads, leading to more than half of country's emission of hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. These are the early concerns. These were the early concerns, and compounds emitted by vehicles, those emitted by power plants and factories, interacted with sunlight and created ground level ozone, resulting to respiratory diseases, asthma, bronchitis, etc. And at that time the questions were raised that are we exploiting our earth too much? What we are living for our posterity. So there was questions of intergenerational equity, and all these issues were there. Yes, the issues were there, but it was very vague. But today, what the concern is that the global warming and the related issues, those things were not there much in 1970s. At that that we need to fight against pollution by afforestation. So afforestation, yes, was an issue even in 1970s. Then there in 1980s, the problem of indiscriminate construction in Himalayas. That was something that Sundarlal Bahuguna and his movement that came in the context of Tehri Dam construction, that will raise the landslide in the hills, and there will be flow of river water will slow down. There will be more silting in the river belt. There will be floods. Those were the concerns of ours in 1970s. So at that time, we talked about the renewable sources of energy, solar power plants, windmills, and all these. But their commercial exploitations was nowhere near, and those were looked more as a kind of solutions to what will happen when the fossil fuels will be exhausted. It was not an issue that we were discussing about those alternative energy sources, not from the point of view of the global warming. That time we were looking at those issues as a kind of what will happen to posterity when there will be no fossil fuel. So that was the kind of our consciousness in 1970s. We didn't have, say, for vehicles, we didn't have any mandatory pollution check. Our power plants were almost, except very few, all our power plants were the thermal power plants. Pollution standards of the factories were very loosely defined. So that was our consciousness of global climate change in 1970s. Then in 1972, Domenico has expressed it, has discussed it, that the Stockholm Conference, UN Conference on Stockholm, UN Conference on Human Environment, that was held in 1972 at Stockholm, and Stockholm Declaration placed environmental issues at the forefront of international concerns. So this is very important. That was at the peak of that Cold War, and that was the time when this issue was posed. And then there was the link between economic growth and pollution of air, water, ocean. And the Stockholm Conference first emphasized the need to begin a dialogue between the industrialized nations and the developing nations. I still recall, I was in school at that time, high school at that time, and Indian Prime Minister at that time, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, categorically stated in that Stockholm Conference that life is one and the world is one, and all these questions are interlinked. This is very important. So this speech of him has been discussed much last year when there was 50 years of this Stockholm Conference. This has much been discussed because the concerns of the developing countries were first flagged by the Indian Prime Minister at that time. Life is one. I have only one life. So if an economist tell me they don't spend much, you better save. Don't put a AC on your um, um, flat because that will raise to pollution. Should I agree? I will not, because for me my life is important. Okay, if I save and if that helps in capital formation and that capital formation helps in economic development, maybe my next generation, next to the next generation will be in a better position economically. But my primary concern is my life. So life is one, so that is important, what Mrs. Gandhi at that time had stressed. And the world is one. That is also important. We have no second planet to go. Um, we cannot exhaust all our resources. We cannot do it in such a way that it causes concerns to subsequent generations. And so these questions are interlinked, and population explosion, poverty, ignorance and disease, the pollution of our surroundings, stockpiling of nuclear weapons, biological and chemical agents of destruction are all parts of vicious circle. And she said that countries with small fraction of world population consume the bulk of natural resources, causing far greater environmental degradation than what developing nations were doing. These things are not new today, but when she flagged this issue in 1972, that was important. So what was the climate concerns in 1980s? So we have come from 70s to 80s. In 80s, the Exxon company in 1982 first in a report stated that by 2060, carbon dioxide level would reach double the pre-industrial level and will push planet's average temperature up by 2 degrees centigrade over the current levels, over then current levels. And that will lead to increased melting in Antarctica, Greenland, resulting to rise in the sea level, causing threat to coastal and low-lying areas. So we are still on this issue. What was predicted in the study report of the Exxon company in 1982? We need to, so what was the solution? So it was suggested that we need to restrict substantially fossil fuel consumption and reduce emission of greenhouse gases. We need to restrict fossil fuel consumption, not because the one day fossil fuel will be exhausted. For that reason, we need to restrict fossil fuel because that is causing to global warming. So that was the concern of 1980s. Now let's see where do we stand in subsequent 3 decades, 1990 to 2020. 1982 was that report. According to the US Environmental Protection Agency, worldwide net emission of greenhouse gases from human activities increased by 43%. It increased by 43% in 15-year period between 1990 and 2015. And emission of carbon dioxide emission from carbon dioxide accounts for 75% of the total emissions, and that increased 51% over a period. 51% in 25 years. So, what was the apprehension? The apprehensions expressed in the Exxon's report all came out to be the total greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 20% between 2005 and 20 in US. It decreased. So if there are efforts in the right direction, if we can invest in the right direction, if we can sensitize our people, then it is possible. It is possible to restrict the climate change. It is possible to restrict the global warming. That's why I say that otherwise very in a very negative picture, there are silver linings also. Then came the Rio conference, the Rio summit, the Earth Summit at Rio de Janeiro in 1992, where the concept of sustainable development was first initiated. It was just talked about. in 1992, and here also Domenico touched these points very elaborately. Now, even General Assembly in 2015 adopted Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to meet human development goals without undermining the planetary integrity. So the Sustainable Development Goals have come into existence in 2015. So this issue in 70s, that was the issue of the climate change was the issue of the intellectuals and the UN bodies and all. Then it came the issues of the countries, the nations, I mean the governments. And now, after 2015, with the Sustainable Development Goals, it has become an issue of everyone. It is an issue for me, it is an issue for you, it is an issue for each and every person, each and every family, each and every organization. And I look at it also in this way, that with the adoption of SDGs, with the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals, concerns of the developing nations that was articulated by the Indian Prime Minister in Stockholm Conference was greatly accommodated. All agencies today are part of the war against global warming. All agencies are today part of the global warming. Mrs. Gandhi in 1972 had said that poverty is the biggest polluter. Because when she said this, she wanted world to appreciate the fact that poverty and pollution, the two cannot be segregated. So global warming as an issue, which was first flagged in 1982, has now, it's a war. The war against that is now is war of everyone. After these Sustainable Development Goals have come, every organization, every corporate bodies, every government departments, for every family, I should say, it's an issue. Now, before coming to the Paris Accord, because this has already been dealt in details by Domenico, I just mention that take any example. Say, take the example. Normally, when we talk about climate change, pollution, global warming, what we have in mind is transport sector. What we have in mind is the energy sector, etc., etc. But do you know that the second biggest polluter is the agricultural sector? We have a tendency to identify agriculture with the rural areas, and in the rural areas pollution is less, so we can't think of that agriculture can be the second most polluter in this climate change, next only to energy sector. Now, why the reason is that we today extensively use fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, etc. And our experience of India shows that we use these subsidized fertilizer, we use these pesticides more than what we should use optimally. We are using excessive. If we can reduce it, our productivity will not be hampered. We can reduce the usage of fertilizer, we can reduce the usage of pesticides with proper training, with proper instruments, without compromising with the productivity. But many of our farmers, they believe that if you put more fertilizer, there will be more production. It's not. So there is a question of optimum utilization of the fertilizers plants. So they also contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. First, say when the fertilizer is being manufactured, when it is manufactured, you need to put it under high pressure and temperature and all that. For that, you energy, and that energy, if it is a thermal energy or like that, it will cause to emission of greenhouse gases. Again, when you use it in the field, then also very methane and other non CO2 emission pollutions will be there. So this is just an example that if we are to address the problem of mitigating global warming, the problem of mitigating the climate change, we have to address the issues of each and every sector separately. We need to have separate policies focusing on the issues of climate change. The Paris Accord says that preferably we have to keep the level rise in temperature within 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Now, this is very ambitious, and this is very ambitious. I should say this is a kind of aspiring target. How that has to be achieved, that is also not very clear. Emissions need to be curbed roughly by 50% by 2030 and should reach to net zero by 2050. That's what the Paris Accord says. And developed countries shall provide financial resources to developing countries to assist to mitigate the issue of carbon emission. This is also a very important issue from the point of view of the third world countries. I will come to that. Now, what are the India's targets? India's targets have been defined by the just a couple of months back by the present Prime Minister of India in the Glasgow, that India will reduce its emission intensity of its emission intensity of its GDP by 45% from 2005 level in next 7 years, that is by 2030. Cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil sources should be raised to 50% by 2030. I think this is, we are going well with that, and already around 43%. And this was unthinkable in 1980s. 43% of India's electric power is generated from non-fossil sources. And our target is net zero emission by 2070. Now, what do we stand today? Yes, as on 31st October 2022, that is as on day, say around 43% of India's installed capacity of power plants comes from non-fossil sources. And the major source is hydel and solar. Out of non-renewable sources, most important is the hydro projects, 12.05%. But the nuclear power accounts only less than 2% in India's case. Then how to achieve the targets? The expanding renewable sources of energy, definitely fine. Greater role of nuclear energy. Greater role of nuclear energy. Now, there are limitations of this because most of the developing countries do not have this thing, because this option. Most of the developing countries, because of security reasons. Then we need to have R&D support to future technologies such as green hydrogens, fuel cells, etc. We need to invest in a big way for this. India introduced a compensation cess on coal production at rupees 400 per ton to fund research and clean energy projects. This is almost 10 years now. This is there. And India didn't go for carbon taxing or like that, but India made a compensation cess on coal production, and this amount which is coming from this one is being used for R&D support for future technologies. And overall, this is an estimate that overall climate finance requirements by 2050 will be 85.6 trillion rupees, 85.6 lakh crores. So that is how we propose to achieve these targets. Now, where do we stand? Global standing of India in carbon dioxide emission. Why carbon dioxide emission? Because 75% of our greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. And by 2021, if we go the country as such, obviously the biggest, most populated country of the world, China, contributes 30.9% of world's carbon dioxide emission. USA contributes 13. This is not in, it's not that China is the highest, USA is the second, it's like that. 13.5% is USA's contribution. Yes, USA is the second. European Union 7.30%, and India's contribution is 7.30%. But if we go by the per capita emission, what that is called carbon footprint and all that, you see that Qatar CO2 emission per capita is 37.29. Qatar, in terms of per capita income, purchasing power parity basis, is one among the top 10 countries of the world. But their per capita carbon dioxide emission is too high. I mean, it needs to be addressed. I mean, to mitigate how to do this. UAE has 23 point, Canada 18%, Australia not percent. I mean that unit. Australia 17, US is 15, Japan 9.7, Germany 9.4, China 7.38. Most of the West European nations, France, UK, Italy comes around 5%, India 1.91%, another South Asian country, India's neighbor, 0.47%. Their per capita income in terms of PPP is slightly less than India, but emission is much less. Now, sector-wise contribution of greenhouse gas emissions in India. Look, electricity 37%. Electricity 37%, where 43% of our electricity is from non-fossil sources. So 57% of the electricity is generated from is basically thermal, from the thermal power plants, and they contribute 37% of India's greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture, I have already touched the point, 21%, manufacturing 17%, transportation 9%, industrial processing 5%, building 5%. The rest are miscellaneous. So this is where, why we need to understand this, we need to have specific, say for the electricity generation, gradually we are moving towards non-fossil sources. We should move but there is a limitation. Say hydel power has a limitation. You need to have the confirmed flow of water, and you need to have gradient to use the water for generation of electricity. So all developing nations cannot have this as a source. Solar power is definitely a more viable an option in the developing world. Agriculture is very important. Agricultural sector needs to be addressed if we are to tackle the greenhouse gas emissions within our target dates. Now, India is playing an important role. India is playing an important role in took the initiative in this International Solar Alliance. International Solar Alliance is aimed at promoting more efficient, low-cost solutions to the energy requirements by leveraging advanced technology in using solar power. And at present, 92 countries have signed and ratified the ISA framework agreement. This is a good development which has come in last 6 years or so, that International Solar Alliance can play a very important role in inclusive mitigation of climate change problems, particularly in the developing nations. Most of the developing nations who do not have the option in a big way to go for nuclear power plants and all that. So my last thing is the road ahead of the developing nations. We need to, as I started, that in 70s we thought that it's a problem of the developed nations, but it's now the problem of the entire planet. It's the problem of the entire planet, and that has now been appreciated by all the nations. We need to balance economic growth with climate change. This is very important. Climate issues, if we cannot sacrifice economic growth while addressing the climate issues, both are to be there, but we need to balance it, and that balancing is not impossible. As I gave you the example of agriculture, that you can substantially reduce India's consumption of chemical fertilizers and pesticides without adversely affecting the productivity. So this is important. So the climate smart agriculture, that we need to go more carbon sinks, areas that store carbon like the forests. We need to go for afforestation in a big way, and here comes the role of the local community for the afforestation. Here comes the role of in last 3 decades there has been a substantial change in the perception of people living in the forest and semi-forest areas, and any move for deforestation is now resisted by the local community, and that is the consciousness, that is sensitization, that has there has been a marked change in this local community's role in India over last 3 decades, and it's happening in many other developing nations. So it's a good development. Carbon tax, India has not gone for carbon tax in a big way, but I personally feel that carbon tax can be used as a measure to sensitize people. Even if it is $1, even if it is ₹1, it may sensitize people. Because commercially, if we look at it, if we impose carbon tax in a big way in industries who are contributing to pollution, then the products may be not competitive. I mean, the price will increase. All these issues will be coming. But we cannot avoid carbon tax because it, in a way, can sensitize people, can bring the consciousness amongst people. Research on electric vehicles is important. In India, about 7 to 8% of is the transport contribution of the transport is about how much? About 9%. Okay, but this is at a time how many cars Indians have compared to Western nations. This is almost very insignificant. So with economic growth, this number of vehicles will increase in a very fast way in next 3 decades in India. And that being so, this this proportion is going to be high. So we need to keep in mind the electric vehicles. Already there are models which are available, but these are too expensive for an average Indian citizen aspiring to buy a vehicle. So we need to invest in a big way to electric vehicles, to manufacture such vehicles at affordable rates. So by and large, this is the road ahead. And only thing I must mention that we are passing through a very bad phase, but the silver linings are there. There are transformation is there, and with that, in years to come, we will be able to mitigate the problem of climate change, the global warming. Okay, that's what I wanted to share. Perhaps I have over-exhausted my time, Shantan.
It was a very, very immersive session, Gautam, and so frankly, a little overshooting of the time really doesn't matter because you not only managed to kind of share a perspective, but going forward, and what is more important is the fact that going forward we have to embrace the entire community, which includes you and me, to handle and address this universal problem. So thank you very much, and I would again open it up to questions from this group, if there are any, and of course, Gautam would be happy to handle them offline as and when required. So there is a question from Priyobrata Mukherjee.
Yeah, thank you for giving this opportunity for questioning. Sir, I just as a environmentalist activist, not any biasness of any country or etc. Globally, I think how much India effort for the protection of environment. I think after EPA 1986, there will be no such kind of landmark that we can say that our environmental protection is actually protected in the field. Actually, we saw that the lack of awareness about the climate change or any pollution or etc. there from the childhood to up to the professional life. So and day after day that I feel that my personal feeling that the act are, which are already made in the past
Priyobrata, we have lost you. Actually, could you complete your question, please?
your perception the I make effort for the climate change or environmental protection.
Priyobrata, we couldn't hear the full question you had. We lost you in the middle because of the internet connection, I believe. Could you please?
Repeat
Yeah.
your question, please.
Okay. Now, my question is that how much effort India give still now, because we see that the lack of awareness about the climate change is there, and lack of new environmental act and new environmental policy are not making any change about in the lower level or grassroots level of our community about the for the awareness or for the protection of environment or climate change. So, what is your opinion about why India actually make this act very weak after 1986? No such kind of umbrella act is present, and these act also day by day different types of amendment are there, and they make the weaken the Environmental Protection Act. So, as an activist, environmental activist, I ask you, what is our motto actually? What is the motto of India as a
Yes.
climate protection of climate and protection of environment?
Yes, Priyabrato, I appreciate your concern. But I just give you two, three examples that I told you that in 1980s, our almost 98-99% of our power generation was from thermal power plants. And today it is 57%. So there has been a substantial increase from 1-2% to 43% non-fossil sources of energy. This is a major change, isn't it? From 1 or 2%, it has increased to 43%. And we are in a country where the coal is available in plenty. So, in spite of that, we are restricting our usage of coal, and we are using other non-fossil options. This is a big change, I believe. Secondly, look at the to what extent you mentioned that we are at the grassroots level, people are not much concerned. Uh, yes, there may be deficiency, but definitely there has been change in the attitude. So the afforestation programs helps in carbon, that carbon sinking. That also mitigates our problem. So that is now has become a kind of in the forest area, that has become a kind of people's program. To a great extent, this has become people's program. People are participating. They are assisting the forest officers, the forest department in having the afforestation programs. And third example I will give, the industry standards, pollution standards of the industries, pollution standards of the vehicles, these are strictly imposed now in India. We didn't have, we were not required to check our pollution of our cars in 30 years back. But now in every 6 months we do it. And if we have not done it, then we are subject to major penalties. So these are some examples. Is the act by itself is not important. What is important? How serious are we in implementing the act? I think there has been substantial change in the attitude. Yes, what you say, that is also true, that it's more changes are needed, and without that, uh, uh, net zero emission of carbon within the target dates may be difficult, but definitely there has been changes.
Yeah, just to build on what Gautam said, I would tend to agree with him, saying that, from where we were to where we are today, there has been substantial progress. But as you mentioned, Theobodo, perhaps there needs to be, a more proactive initiative as we go along. Uh, and we must all appreciate that this is a fairly long and arduous process. And, building in a collective awareness at a community level and above is a journey. So yes, while concerns are there, there is definitely signs of positive steps being taken. Uh, Great. So if there are no further questions, I would like to move to our uh, third and final session, which is a session on sustainable solutions for tomorrow, Industry 4.0 and beyond, which is going to be kind of shared by Shekhar Dasgupta. Shekhar Dasgupta is a thought leader in industrial IoT, an industry veteran with over 35 years in the IT industry in US and India. He worked for a large MNC and early stage enterprise software company, an Indo-French systems company before launching his own venture, Greenfield Software Private Limited. This was over a decade ago when crude oil price per barrel first reached the $100 mark, posing serious business risk for energy-intensive industries like data centers, and IoT was emerging as a viable solution for driving operational and energy efficiency. Shekhar bootstrapped Greenfield Software over the last 10 years. He launched a portfolio of industrial IoT applications for Industry 4.0 and data centers. His vision is to build key components for sustainable data centers as well as other energy-intensive businesses, aiming to go green and driving digitalization for a better tomorrow. Prior to starting GFS, Shekhar was president of California-based College Technologies and managing director of Oracle India. He's also on the advisory board of a UK-based AI company. Shekhar completed his bachelor's in economics from Presidency College, Calcutta, and PGDM from IIM Bangalore, specializing in power management. He has authored numerous articles in leading business journals and has done a few teaching assignments in business schools. And in this session, Shekhar speaks about the collective need to find ways and means to combat further deterioration of a fragile world, and outlines the sectoral share of GHG to determine where the world can derive early results. So here we have someone who is kind of, doing his own bit to contribute to handling the climate change challenge. Over to you, Shekhar.
Just a minute, Shanton. We have Shomo raising his hand for quite
Okay.
some time.
Oh, I'm so sorry,
So was
Shomo. I
that
missed
for
you.
both of
Um, Hello. Is it possible to accommodate it, or like we are running
Absolutely,
very short?
absolutely. No, no, no,
All
no.
right. All
Please
right.
go back. I mean, we have time for questions. We would welcome questions.
All right, sure, sure, sure. Actually, it was for Mr. Gautam Bhattacharya. One of the lovely presentations showing how India is progressing over the years. But specifically, like since my research in Japan is completely on India's energy and India's emission profile, one of the things that we are really struggling with, and because we don't know what sort of policy can come out from our analysis, because like we are struggling with the policy instruments. So I have two questions, but I'll ask the most pertinent one first. One of the targets of INDC, and actually this is tying back to the previous speaker. So the INDC is determined by India, and that is basically reducing 45% of emission intensity by 2030 as compared to the 2005 levels. But emission intensity is basically CO2 emissions by GDP, CO2 emissions being the numerator and GDP being the denominator of the fraction. So if GDP is increasing exponentially and CO2 is increasing linearly, which means we are still reducing the emission intensity because GDP is increasing at a higher rate. But at the same point of time, emissions is also increasing. I know it is not possible to reduce it completely, but do we perhaps need a different metric to gauge how we are reducing our emissions? Because since like GDP, like I said, like reiterating that GDP is increasing exponentially, but CO2 is increasing linearly. So, do we need, as a policy instrument, a different metric to measure how much we are reducing our emissions?
It's a very interesting question, Shomo. It is GDP in the developing nations will be increasing, and automatically it may be intuitively we can say that at the same time that CO2 emissions will also increase. Now, if your point is that if it is the emission per say per dollar or something like that, then can we, even if it is restricted, I mean, even if it is restricted at the 2005 level or say 50% of 2005 level or like that, you mean to say that overall this thing is much higher, overall emission will be much higher, so can we
Yes,
have
like
some
yeah, yeah.
huh?
Overall emissions will still increase because GDP is
Still
increasing more.
increase, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So that's true. So this is GDP, I think this is important only for the purpose of comparison of how India is doing compared to say some other, say how Kuwait is doing, or how Bangladesh is doing, how Japan is doing, or how European Union is doing, like that. For that comparison only it is important. But for the purpose of restricting the greenhouse gas emission, this is GDP per head, per capita GDP is not important. What is more important is not per capita, per capita, GDP measure is not important.
Emission intensity, basically.
Emission,
Yeah.
what we perhaps more important will be per head. That is your what is called carbon footprint. That will be more accurate way of assessing the situation.
Right, right. That answers a lot. Thank you so much. Can I just quickly slip in my second question?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Yes, yes. So my second question is with regards to the non-fossil sources, particularly, because when we talk about, we have to make a difference between power, that is capacity, and energy, that is generation. So in terms of power or installed capacity, right now we are close to 44% of non-fossil sources, including solar, hydro, nuclear. But however, our generation, that is the total amount of electricity given to the grid, that is still at a miserly 18 to 20%, where about 75% is completely generated by coal, even though the capacity is has lowered with regards to that. So my point is, thermal power, even though it has not increased as much as renewable power, but the capacity factor or the loading factor for thermal energy is much more than renewable energy in India. So much so that the generation has not matched the capacity. That is, the electric power generation has not matched the capacity. What sort of policy instrument can we take so that we can also increase the generation as much as the capacity?
It's a very pertinent question what you have raised. Shaumo, what I think that our thermal power plants, we have a long history of thermal power plants. Their capacity utilization is much higher as compared to the power plants run by the non-fossil sources like hydel, solar, etc. Particularly in respect of solar, we are still in the stage of exploration. We are investing a lot. We are creating capacity, but its efficiency level, the what percentage of that capacity is actually being generated, there we are low. So you are right that 43% is from the point of view of capacity, but from the point of view of generation, it is less. But we are in the process. The amount of investment is being made for research and development of the solar power plants it's quite impressive, and it's a challenge. And I believe we will be able to. We will be in years to come. We will be able to raise efficiency of our plants, non-fossil sources. Will be. So it's a more a technological issue where we are failing here. It's a more a technological issue, and that needs to be addressed. And we are on the job.
I see. Just a final thing. Like, do you think, like, technologically, of course, but do you think, economics wise or economic policy wise, something can be done in this aspect, in this regards?
Say you can provide incentives. You can, that is being done for the, at least for the solar power. Incentives are quite attractive. And many those who can afford, they are going for solar power. I mean, you put it on the grid and you are compensated and all that, etc., etc. But definitely, as I mentioned, that India should think seriously about the carbon tax. And that is not for generation of revenue and all that. We need it to sensitize people. To sensitize people, even if it is 1 rupee. If I pay 1 rupee and I know that this 1 rupee is imposed on me as a kind of penalty for generation of so much of carbon, that make me conscious. That is somewhere we need to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That answers a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shoma. I'm sorry for missing you out. And thanks, Gautam, once again. And sorry for the kind of delay, Shekhar, but over to you and your session.
No, thank you, Shantan. And this was an interesting, dialogue which we just witnessed, and the issues of economic growth versus GDP, the emission, this thing, having a different kind of measure, as well as the problem of renewable energy. And I'll come to that second point a little later in my presentation also. First, a quick question. Can you all see my slide?
No, we can't see your slide. At least I can't see your slide. Can you speak a little louder?
Shekhar, we
can't
Can you
cannot.
see now?
We can't
Shekhar,
see
you are
slides.
you are not presenting as far as we are concerned.
Okay, let me, because you never could see my slide, huh? Now?
Nope.
No, we can't see your slides.
Could you ever see my slides before
No.
the
No.
questions?
No, we couldn't see your
The
slides.
video on, camera
Is
on.
your video on?
No,
No,
I don't think
I
he
don't.
needs his video on. You can show your
Yeah, I
slides
don't.
without the video. Video and slide are
That is
different.
correct. And that is correct. Yes.
There it is coming.
We can see
Yeah,
the.
now we got it.
You got it?
We
Okay,
can't
good.
see you,
Yeah.
Shekhar. We are missing you, but we
Do
can.
you
No,
really
but
need to
we
see?
can see the
Yeah,
slides.
you
Yeah.
can see the
Okay.
slides. I think
Right.
that is more important rather than to see me. Yeah.
As you wish.
So, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So, first, thank you, Shantan, for this kind introduction. And of course, I must thank Nistarini College for having me present out here. Life has been made much easier with the previous two speakers who have already touched upon quite a few important points. And so I'd like to start with, a point which has been raised quite a bit, that one has seen climate change in earlier times also. So what's different now?
Sorry, Shekhar, your slides went off.
Shekhar, we can't see your slides.
No, this is. Let me once again put it up. Can you see now?
Yes. Yeah, we are back.
Okay, good. So a point which has been raised earlier, about climate change has been happening before. In fact, geological studies have shown that there have been 8 cycles of ice ages and warmer periods in the last 800,000 years. The last one, the end of the last ice age, was about 12,000 years ago. And that marked the beginning of the modern climate era and of human civilization also. However, what is to be seen is that the earlier climate change was because of the small variations in Earth's orbit that changed the amount of solar energy that was coming to our Earth, coming to the Mother Earth. So that was contributing the small variations in Earth's orbit, and which is resulting in the changes in the solar energy coming into the planet. But now it is because of human activity that has been discussed earlier. And you can see from this slide, you see this picture, the largest amount of temperature change, if you see, if you take 1950 as the base year, and what it's today in 2019, this is when the picture shows, compared to 1950, is the largest amount of temperature change. You see the red spots? The hot areas is in the northern hemisphere. And why so? Because most of the human population, the land mass is there mostly in the northern hemisphere. And that's where most of the human population is. So it's clearly because of human activity that we are seeing this climate change. And what? And this has happened because of this huge amount of GHG increase, greenhouse gas emission increase, which comes to my next slide. And this has contributed to this big difference in climate change. So you're talking about the Paris Accord, which actually had the countries agreeing to that by end of 2100, the increase in temperature will be 1.5 degrees, the pre-industrialization level. What is the pre-industrialization level? was 1750, when the first industrial revolution actually started with the coming of coal and steam power. So if you see actually in this slide, is the GHG emission is today at 37 billion tons equivalent CO2 emissions, which was in you start from the pre-industrialization levels, it's close to zero, and it started from about 1900, was about less than two, and it's gone up to 37 billion tons today. And just look at the countries which are emitting, and I think Gautam had shown in his previous slides. Obviously, the first thing to notice out here is it's in the northern hemisphere, right? China, North America, Europe, India, and much of Asia is also in the northern hemisphere. So this contributes to over 80% of the GHG emissions. Africa, South America, and there's a big portion which is also transport, international transport, shipping and aviation, which is completely dependent on fossil fuel as compared to railways. Railways is mostly electrified, and I'll come to the issue of railways again on my next in my next slides. We'll discuss about transportation and specifically different modes of transportation. So this is basically the GHG spread and how it is actually impacting temperatures. And if we don't do today, we have seen what will be the impact of climate changes in not only on land masses, but also in the oceans. And if that impacts oceans, that also impacts livelihood. A lot of the fishermen who are dependent on water and seas, for their living. So we have got a target, right? A target of reducing of the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature as compared to the pre-industrialization levels. It shouldn't be more than that. It should be within 1.5, and to also reduce the GHG emissions by 50% by 2030, which is of course a very, very tall order so we have to really focus on which areas can we concentrate on. Now in this slide you see nearly actually nearly 75% of the GHG emissions is accounted by the energy sector. And when we say the energy sector, it means not just electricity but also the the non-electrical this thing. For example, when you're doing coal mining, it obviously needs electrical power to do coal mining, so that it contributes to emissions. Similarly, when you're doing oil exploration, it needs energy to do that oil production as well as the refining. So there are multiple parts of it. So energy is accounting for about 74 to nearly 75% of the GHG emissions. And in the earlier presentation, we were agriculture was mentioned as a single thing, and it was related to the fertilizers. Now, fertilizer production is also can be considered as part of the industry, right? And that is consuming energy. We'll come to this. How do we account for the parts of industrial production which is going into agriculture? So that also has to be taken into account, as well as what is called the direct emissions which are taking place because of direct operations, as well as things which are because of indirect operations. And and the third one is if I'm actually using procured products, what is the emission which is taking place in the manufacturing of those procured products? So really over here, if we see about 75% is due to the energy emissions arising out of energy, we focus on that area on energy. And within that, the industrial sector and the transport sector and the commercial buildings account for nearly 80% of this. So rather than looking at what the consumers or people in the households what are their consumption? So we talked about, in 1972 when Indira Gandhi went to Stockholm. Yes, she did mention, the world is one, and what about the poorer countries where people are using even coal, or they're using firewood for their daily living. Of course, there is an area which you can focus on, but the biggest area of emissions, even in a country like India and other developing countries, are due to the commercial sector, and it's mostly due to energy. So my next slide, we look at this energy, and there are four parts to this. First is on energy production, and energy production is both electricity as well as the non-electrical energy production. So I just talked about, for example, when you are doing oil exploration or oil refining, there is obviously consumption of there is electrical power, and there is GHG emissions which are taking place because of that. And how it is, the next point is, how is this energy which is being produced, how are they being deployed? So the largest portion of this is in electricity generation. And this includes both the fossil fuels as well as the electricity generation is through the renewable energy sources. The other parts of energy consumption is in transport. According to the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India, which is part of the Ministry of Energy, Department of Power, the largest consumer of electrical power in India is actually the railways. So, in one way, railways, it's not using fossil fuels, which is very good. But however, when India's thermal power is actually 74% is dependent on thermal power, we are basically, the railways is dependent on non-clean power, while it's running on electricity, it's dependent on non-clean power. So if we want to look at, how we go green, the railways, it's how, if we actually convert our electrical generation to more renewable energy sources, then the railways also become greener. So this is what's called the scope 2 emissions. We talked about, for example, the electric vehicles. Now, it's fine to have an electric vehicle, but if the electric vehicle is dependent on thermal power, then it actually doesn't do well, because from a scope 2 perspective, yeah, scope 1, yeah, you're using electricity as against oil. However, from a scope 2 perspective, I'm using actually thermal power, which is not very good. And car manufacturing needs steel, for example. Now, if steel is dependent on fossil fuel, steel manufacturing is dependent on fossil fuel, then the manufacturing of this car, electric vehicle, is actually it reduces the efficiency from a GHG emission point of view. So we have to look at the whole thing in a very holistic manner. So it is not only just the electric vehicles, but how it is actually dependent on the sources of my electricity generation. And so this whole thing of railways and electric vehicles. So the other point which came up in the earlier discussions, I'd like to answer that. In terms of inefficiency in, for example, in the solar this thing, capacity utilization. World over, there is a problem actually in the renewable energy, and the problem is that which is called curtailment. It's a term which is used in the renewable energy sector, that you have to, there are certain times when the demand for power goes down. Say during night times, you can't have solar, and then there is seasonal variations, or because of the demand of some sectors at some points of time they go down. Now, energy cannot be stored. Of course, a lot of investment is now taken in terms of storage. So those who are generating, who are dependent on the solar this thing, they have to curtail the production of solar power during this point of time. So that's why the whole issue of energy storage has taken up huge amount of importance, and a lot of research is taking place out here. Hydrogen is actually saying, we can actually curtail the problem of, we can actually reduce the problem of curtailment, but the hydrogen as a source of power, it'll take at least another 7, 8 years. A lot of work which is going on, and I'm personally involved in that work also. But that will take a fair amount of time before hydrogen actually, as a source of power, becomes a reality in this sector. So, if we look at this whole area of energy production and energy consumption, it is actually a fourfold issue. One is the kind of GHG emissions which are taking place at the time of production, and the kind of emissions which are taking place at the time of consumption, which is due to electricity consumption, electricity generation, as well as electricity consumption. And we have to take into account, when you're talking in terms of measurements, right? It's measurement not only what is called the scope 1 emission, which is the direct emissions, also the scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, which is the indirect emissions which are taking place. So, this is the World Economic Forum. They have come out. You have to look at the whole as a holistic approach, because there's a issue of transfer pricing. I try to reduce emission from one, but that increases emission from some other source. Take the example of electric vehicles again. The battery production can actually also, for making of the batteries for the electric vehicles, that itself can actually cause a lot of GHG emissions. So you'll have to actually see what is the net effect. The cars which are dependent on vehicles which are dependent on fossil fuels versus the vehicles which are electric vehicles over a certain lifespan. So you take, for example, if I take 100,000 miles for both the vehicles, yes, the electric vehicle will score a lot more, because within about 30,000 miles, it will be net zero. I mean, as compared to operations of a fossil fuel car, as against the manufacture of electric vehicle, within about 1/3 of the life span of the cars, it will offset. So these are things which actually has to be taken into consideration in terms of, from where is the energy being produced, how it is being produced, what is the technology being produced. In today's presentation, my part of the presentation, I will look at the technology part of it, and that also from a narrow angle of the Industry 4.0, which is basically a confluence of the information technology and operational technology. So we are not looking at the technological processes which have undergone a significant amount of change in the last 30, 40 years, in terms of, for example, manufacturing of steel or of non-ferrous metals, cement, etc. In an industry point of view, for manufacturing, we just talked about railways being a large consumer of energy, of electricity power. The others are metallurgical industry, and both ferrous as well as non-ferrous, and cement industry. And then next comes is all these chemicals, chemical industry. And the chemical industry has the effect of not only emissions coming out of power, but also due to chemical waste, industrial waste, which is also there. So we now go on to this thing, Industry 4.0, which is actually refers to the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution began at about 1760. James Watt with the steam engine coming out, and coal had just been started. People started mining the coal on an industrial basis, and that was being used. Most of the factories were steam based. Then came Industry 2.0, when people started using electricity, and the machines were electrical based. You started having actually like lathe machines, which was based on electrical power. So that's when Industry 2.0 came in, and that ran for a long, long time till Industry 3.0, which is around the 1960s to 1970s when computers were introduced in the manufacturing processes. You had the CNC machines and the DNC machines and program logic controllers, the PLCs. That was the industry 3.0. 4.0 came about 2011. Actually, the term was coined by Germans, the government in Germany, the Germans' industrial sector, called Industry 4.0, where they talked about the confluence of operational technology and information technology, and that started the whole process of smart manufacturing. Um, you go to a plant, most modern plants today, you'll see the whole host of, it's a lot is computer based, not only with the PLCs, etc., but they're all tied to it together. The foundation of Industry 4.0 are networks. So it's basically the cyber networks and the physical machines and the cyber networks which are bringing about the smart manufacturing, and they're all interconnected. Maybe factories are connected to another factory. The whole collaborative process manufacturing which is taking place. Now, what has been happening, in the evolution of Industry 4.0, we have come to an era of sustainable manufacturing. So, how can we actually improve the whole processes so that we can produce not only in a more efficient manner, which are obviously all at the manufacturing level, the CEOs or the plant managers, etc., they're looking at efficiencies, right? How do I actually reduce my costs? And energy is a big item in the cost. So one is from an altruistic point of view, am I going to change the world? The other one is, how do I actually improve my bottom line? So, the companies at a micro level, they're more concerned about that one. So the good news is that, most manufacturing establishments are looking at it from that micro level and looking at how do I improve my processes, how do I reduce my costs, and how do I become more competitive so I can market better. We had seen in the silver lining in the previous presentation by Gautam, that the silver lining is in the US, they have been able to reduce the GHG emissions by about 20%. How has that come about? That has come about because the industrial establishment, the industrial sector, has been able to reduce the GHG emissions, both direct as well as indirect, because all have been driven by this one goal, that they have to reduce their costs, they have to improve their processes. And that's what this Industry 4.0 is all about, and is bringing about a marriage of different technologies together. So we will be looking at, there are so many of these technologies. What's not listed out here, for example, is 3D printing. Now, 3D printing is also taken on a big thing in terms of a manufacturing thing. We'll talk about just a few of those technologies, four of them to be precise: industrial IoT, digital twin, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and surprisingly, blockchain. Let's start with industrial IoT. In industrial, that's basically the core of Industry 4.0, and that's how it actually started when machines became smart. Machines had built-in sensors. Machines had network connectivity, and machines could be, connected to each other, and they could be connected to information systems, back-end information systems. What happened because of this? It helped in terms of visibility. Visibility of electrical consumption. We are basically focusing in this part is in terms of the energy efficiency, and that also from an electrical point of view. Whether it's in power generation or it's which is also part of the industrial sector, or it's part of the manufacturing processes of, say, steel plants or car manufacturing, we are being able to now find out, where how much consumption, electricity consumption, is taking place at each point of the manufacturing process. And when you measure, you can get things done, because now you know where is the wastage which is taking place, what's the distribution loss which is taking place, and this can help in terms of improving my processes and improving efficiencies in the systems. Reducing wastage itself contributes to at least about 7-8% of energy consumption. So if I can reduce by just sheer reducing the wastage of industrial manufacturing processes, 7-8% is a significant amount which translates into reduction of GHG. So that's the part of industrial IoT. Now, industrial IoT, the next thing which came is in terms of the analytics, right? And being able to analyze and predict, what I can do in terms of improving my systems. Artificial intelligence and machine learning has helped in terms of enhancing this predictability of demand and supply. We talked about the curtailment earlier, right, of renewable energy. Now, if we can do energy planning through usage of artificial intelligence, then I can reduce the problem of curtailment. If I can reduce the problem of curtailment, then the capacity of solar power plants improves, dramatically improves. So the issue in terms of solar power capacity is because of this problem of curtailment, and that has to be reduced. Artificial intelligence can vastly improve this area. The next one is in terms of this digital twin. Digital twin is a virtual representation of the physical world. Now, what that helps is in that I can now design my entire process. It's not just a diagram from an architectural point of view, but I can actually have a complete live virtual representation of my building or of my factory and find out exactly how much of consumption is going to take place at different times, different seasons, and being able to determine actual consumption. The problem in today's world is because we design at least say 30% more than what is to be consumed, right? We design maybe not 30% is sometimes very conservative. Sometimes we design for 100% because we want to ensure redundancies. I don't want to make. I want to make sure that if my peak production goes up to say 50% more, I should not be short on power because of peak, and I lose out on profitability because of that. Now, digital twin, along with this, which of course includes this artificial intelligence, can help us to determine, what is the kind of capacity that I need at this point of time, and I plan accordingly, so that that portion comes as a demand, as a service, rather than I build that capacity within my thing, and there's a huge amount of wasted resource when I'm not using it. The last area is in terms of blockchain, which is, of course, everyone knows from a crypto point of view, and because crypto has earned a bad name in the last couple of months, but blockchain has got multiple other usage, and of course, supply chain has got the attention of blockchain. The other one is because of this peer-to-peer networks. Blockchain is getting deployed, particularly in Europe, in terms of being able to find out, track, visualize, monitor in terms of actual carbon footprint of each manufactured process. So there is this whole thing of how much. In fact, that was I think also a question. How much are we measuring, right? So this blockchain technology, which is this distributed ledger, peer-to-peer networks, which is immutable, can actually help us to understand, determine what is the amount of energy which is being consumed, and how much of GHG emission which is taking place because of that for each item in the value chain of a product. Because when I'm procuring and I'm committed to the bottom line reporting for my GHG emissions, I need to understand the scope 3, and I'm procuring this. Am I actually procuring from a manufacturer which is not adhering to the GHG standards, or am I actually, or can I actually go to another manufacturer which is adhering to the GHG standards? So the blockchain technology is actually being able to help us determine this, as well as help us in terms of the load monitoring, load generation in the power plants itself, in the grid, we being able through the blockchain technology, accurate load monitoring and generation. Again, this becomes very, very important from the renewable energy thing because they want to solve the problem of curtailment in their generation capacity. So I have got two case studies to help us through understanding, how this technology or this Industry 4.0 is helping us. The first, which I call the ex ante, being a student of economics, this before the event, right? Ex ante, before the event. So before the event, we are doing a virtual representation of, in this case, a building, a university room in Denmark. It's a new building, and they wanted to actually the objectives was in terms of energy efficiency, how much the temperature, it has to be within a certain temperature range, the minimum and the maximum, which is being defined, and it will have a maximum CO2 threshold level, which is also defined. And in a room, they'll be having different subjects, different classes. So there's an issue of occupancy, right? So sometimes they'll have only say 5 students, and sometimes they may have 40 students. So being able to actually determine if I have this level of occupancy at what time of the day, or what time of the month, or what time of the season or semester do I have this differing occupancy levels. So you have this predictive capability, which is built in using artificial intelligence, and they had this sensor data coming in, and they made this virtual representation, and they determined what is the kind of carbon footprint that they'll have from this room. So this is at the planning stage, and they eventually what they did was once the room actually came about, they did the same thing on a exposed basis in terms of after the event, after it's gone live, the classrooms were occupied. So you see the lower this thing, you'll find two lines. One is the red line, the other one is the blue line. The blue line was the before, at the time of virtual representation. The orange is the one which is actual, right? And you'll see both in terms of the CO2 emission as well as in the terms of the temperature range, it is not too dissimilar. In fact, they nearly followed the same patterns, which is a good example that digital twin can help in terms of improving energy efficiency and reducing GHG emissions. The other one is exposed, after the event, and this is a issue thing which is taking place in a data center, which I'm obviously closely associated with, as Shantan mentioned in the introduction. So in a large data center, this whole thing was monitored. All, they have a lot of equipment, right? All the HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, starting from the chiller plant right down to the air handling units. And they have all these electrical powers, transformers, switch gears, electrical panels, energy meter. So they were all actually, we had this thing of capturing power consumption at each point of the power chain in the thing, as well as in the mechanical side of things, all the entire cooling parts. And also, because data centers have to run nearly at 100%, they can never have any downtime. Their backup power is DG sets, generating sets, and that runs on diesel, because you still don't have solar or wind as yet as a reliable backup power in data centers. So you had to also monitor the usage of diesel in the generating sets. So, and from here, this is an organization which is committed to GRI reporting, the Global Reporting Initiative, which is a Dutch-based thing, which a lot of the large listed companies around the world, they're committed to GRI reporting in terms of GHG emissions. So you see any of the annual reports of large companies, they have an entire section, appendix, on their CO2 emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, which is actually reported. So here's this organization which does the CO2 reporting, and from the server halls, you see below the CO2 equivalent emissions which they have actually helped to capture from the power consumption. So that's basically what I had to share with you today, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you for a wonderful session, Shekhar. I mean, the drill down along with case studies show actually the application and the execution of some of the initiatives have been wonderful. So would really look forward to some questions.
Yeah, maybe at this point of time, I'd like to show my face.
Oh, excellent. That's an additional bonus.
All right.
Yes, I think we have a question from Shobik. Go ahead, Shobik.
Shekhar, thank you for making such an exceptional presentation about uh, the requirement of making proper and optimum utilization of the energy sector and how to make savings in creating energy. I have got a very simple question. Now, as we have seen, there are various traditional methods whereby the production of energy was actually where actual production was actually not required. For instance, there were some traditional method of refrigeration. Sometimes we have seen that when we were young, people were using that that kulhars, the earthen
Kulshi.
pots to keep the water cool,
Kulshi and Kujo.
and which we call kujo in Bengali.
Right.
And now the using the same principle, now I have seen there are some reports that some people have uh, made some sort of earthen refrigerators. And there are systems in Iran and some of them, Middle Eastern countries, where they have utilized the system by which grains have been kept for a very long time without, resorting to any sort of external power. Now, do you think that while on one hand we can resort to the cutting edge technology to reduce the production of energy, or maximizing the utilization of energy, and at the same time reduce the requirement of energy by resorting to some of the traditional methods? Now here I'd like to give one more example. Now buildings. Now these days we are more and more dependent upon refrigeration, air conditioning. Now there were some traditional buildings where hardly there was any requirement of air conditioning. And another thing is, if you have a lot of plantation, all of us know that temperature automatically drops because of evaporation and various other factors. Now, what is your take on this particular issue and this particular point?
No, I absolutely agree. And there's a lot of work which is taking place. Let's go one by one. In terms of the refrigeration, right? You have talked about traditional methods. In fact, a lot of work which is already taking place is refrigerations today, are far more energy efficient compared to what was there, say, 20 years back. The old refrigerators that we had yesterday, they should not be used simply because, they are very large energy consumers. So one is by utilizing technology and making them more energy efficient. The other one is you are saying make it zero. I'm not using energy at all, right?
Yeah.
maybe there is some work which is taking place from an industrial sector. I just shift gear, because I'm more familiar in that area. Is sugar manufacturing. Now, sugar manufacturing, what they do is cogeneration. They hardly use electrical power, because the biomass or traditional electrical power from the utilities, because the biomass, the sugar, the sugar cane itself is converted into energy, right? They have their own power
Ethanol.
plants. Yeah, the biomass is converted into electrical power. Remember I was talking about the transfer pricing. However, that biomass is actually becomes ash, black ash. So, and that, what do? They actually dump it on the on soil. So, this huge amount of sugar industry which is there along the Gomti River in UP, right? So, from an economic point of view, they have solved a problem because they're not using utility power. They're using the biomass, which is coming from the sugar cane, converting into electricity. Their electric power cost is practically nil, apart from the little bit of capital cost that they have done in terms of building the little power plant for that biomass. However, they are actually not doing the earth any good, because that is making it ash and being dumped on the fields, and those fields, and they, it's so bad. I went and saw that it becomes like a little hill. It's like about 20 feet high hill, and that land is gone. You can't use that land at all now. And or people are using that for making pavements, or making the roads. It can be used, or you can also make bricks out of that. So there's a lot of work which is taking place. So this is an issue of transfer pricing, right? I do something out here, but I impact something else. I transfer the problem onto something else. So in industrial cooling, I don't know about the domestic thing, but in industrial cooling, there's a lot which is taking place. The heat which is getting generated from the cooling, that is getting converted into energy. So you are not using the power. So it is only one-time power. The first time I am running the electricity, running my air conditioning, HVAC systems, it's bring out heat. I capture the heat exchanger basically, and I'm using that back, converting that into power, and that runs on itself, feeds on itself. So this is a good example actually how we are being able to reduce GHG emission from a cooling this thing. And perhaps that same system will come in later in terms of domestic usage also. Have been able to hopefully answer your question, Chovik.
Thank you so much, Shekhar.
Great. So, any other questions? Pothikrit has a question.
Yeah, it's pretty late, but Shekhar, you kept on talking about transfer pricing. We talked about electric vehicles, and they will do a great job, and especially when we make electricity without fossil fuel or things like that. However, the next problem will come with the batteries when
Yes,
they run out of their life. Then we'll be creating another environmental situation when we dump the batteries.
that is correct. And that's why a lot of thing which is taking place in the battery itself. One, they have determined that if I take the life cycle of the two cars, fossil fuel based cars as well as electric vehicles, in current technology, after about 30,000 miles, the electric vehicle scores. Right. That's considering the battery and all of the manufacturing process. That's considering the battery. So when I replace the battery, it'll go by another 30,000 miles, right? But the technology itself of the battery, they're doing a lot of improvement, especially now. the supply chain issue, which has come about in the battery thing, that has propelled this issue even further. They're trying to solve that problem because they have been badly impacted. The electric vehicle manufacturers have been badly impacted because of the supply chain issues with the batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good example actually. Electric vehicle from a transfer pricing point of view.
Any further questions? I think Shomo's back and with a question.
Just one second. Shekhar, can you just get out of presentation mode?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, many questions actually, because this is.
Yeah, but I have a question for you, Shomo. I have a question for you.
Please.
In your previous this one, you had mentioned that GDP is growing at an exponential level. How is that? Because my understanding is that GDP is going at a linear at about between 5 to 7%. Exponential means that if it is growing at 3%, next year it will be 9%. The next after that it will be 27%. But it is not going that way.
Right. The growth itself is year to year is 5% or 7%.
Yeah,
But if we
that's
take
linear, right? It's a linear growth. In fact, we see fluctuations, right? Because of COVID, in fact, it became it reduced.
Right. That is quarter
From
to
7 to
quarter.
4%. Yeah, so it's
Right.
not exponential; it is linear.
But if we take the last 10 years, let's say for example.
Yeah, it's still linear. It's going at the rate about 5%. If I take last 10 years, it's 5% per annum. It's not exponential.
That is technically when we are taking the average over a period of time, right? But if we are actually seeing the value added, that is year upon year, so the curve fitting shows that it is more of an exponential function than a linear function.
Maybe we'll have this discussion, this thing, and how, because it's a growth. It's a one single line growth which is taking place. It's a linear.
Right.
Exponential goes, it's a parabolic kind of a curve.
Right.
Economic growth is not parabolic. It's just
Economic
a
growth
straight
is
line.
not parabolic, definitely. But then again, we will definitely have a conversation about this, and I'll definitely connect with you on email. My question to you is very simple. Thank you for shedding light on four different aspects of economic in energy economics. One is curtailment, circular economy, burden shifting, and I think the last thing which you mentioned is transfer pricing and everything. My focus is very simple. At a certain level, do you think curbing the demand itself at the consumer level is, because that is one of that is probably the most environmentally sustainable solution from let's say an academic point of view, or from let's say solving all the issues. Is that a sustainable enough policy, that reducing the demand itself for a certain product, whereby we automatically reduce a lot of the consumption?
Yeah, very good question. So there are two aspects to it. One is, do we do it as a fiat? It'll have political repercussions. The other one is natural, from an economic point of view. Look at the Uberization of much of a value chain in our day-to-day lives, right? Starting from Uber itself. Most people don't. A lot of people are actually now disowning cars. In fact, I have sold off my car. I rely on Uber. I use transport when I need it. Most of the time I'm at home. I'm a retired person. Why do I need to travel out? Why do I need to own a car? So, now you've actually seen the Uberization not only of cars, but of other services as well. So the demand is coming down because of this. So however, if the political power, which is this thing, if they had actually done a fiat, like demonetization, then becomes a problem, becomes a political issue. So economics, I think, drives. is
Right.
driving much of this change which is taking place, and which is very good. Or it's a
It's
groundswell which is taking place. This whole deforestation which has been taking place, there's a huge amount of resistance. You've seen, what is the impact of deforestation of Amazon forests, particularly taking place. Thank God, something has now, the trend has been reversed. Hopefully, we will not again see this re-reversal of that.
at a certain level, like, don't you think like companies like Apple or Samsung or Amazon are artificially creating demand by their advertisement, and like the corporate responsibility or the ESG matrix is still pretty much underdeveloped for these giants, basically, like which are probably outside of governments because they are multinational.
Perhaps, but the demand for mobile communication has become, and mobile communication is definitely leading a lot to the pollution levels. There's no doubt about it. So maybe a time will come when we will not be dependent on these kind of mobile communication. Yeah, and something else will take over. But
I'll be
whether
I'll,
that
I'll be
problem will
sure
lead to
to.
another problem, I don't know.
I'll be sure to share a link about that, and I'll definitely keep in touch with you over the email
Sure.
with regards to the
Actually,
growth
yeah, I
aspect.
had my this presentation will be uploaded, and my email link is on the last slide of that presentation.
For sure, for sure.
Wonderful. Any further questions? I think I realize that these have been very very stimulating sessions, and the very fact that we are eliciting questions and bringing out aspects which I'm sure that the audience and the viewers are kind of getting newer insights. Is wonderful. At the same time, I would like to kind of ask, in case there are any observations besides questions, which anyone would like to share. So great. I think that I suppose if there are no other questions as such, we formally close our webinar. And I have to say that personally, it has been very, very enjoyable, informative, and insightful. And I'm sure that the others have enjoyed it as well.
I think Priyobroto has raised a hand. He wants to say something.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
here is
I say a few words. It's actually my personal experience. So such type of policies, industries, domestic, all other data we have. We have different types of technology. We have different type of in worldwide. We have different type of economic condition, political situations, etc., etc. But as a citizen, as a global citizen, we need to unite. I think, and for developing country like the India or African countries or Southeast Asia, we need a lot of fund actually. A lack of fund is make this a very condition and situation very horrible. Sometimes we want to do something, but we cannot because this barrier, economic barrier. So this is the time now. I think as global social forum and different international organizations are there. These are all in nature of the citizen and civic organization, not any international or national political or nationwide, etc. So each and every layer of the society, maybe farmer, maybe tribal, maybe industrialist, maybe scientist, all should be we should united here in India.
that's a very pertinent suggestion and observation. I definitely think that it has to be inclusive.
This is getting,
all
this is
above
getting,
climate change. Yeah,
this
this
is
is my
getting,
request. Yeah,
this
thanks.
is getting very late. What Priyabruto has brought up will take another 3 hours of discussion.
Yes, yes. I
Uh,
think that
yeah,
merits another
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 discussion. Yeah,
another discussion.
yeah,
I agree with you, Potikrit.
yeah.
And so thank you everyone for taking time out, and especially for the speakers. Thank you so much for kind of taking out time and spending time in preparing the presentations and sharing with all of us. And I think it's wonderful to have you share your insights. One of the things I definitely realized, I mean, while we have discussed a number of things with a great amount of detail, what I kind of mentioned at the initial level when I was introducing the webinar is that this is not an issue or a problem which will go away. There will be various initiatives which will kind of be started. And with technology and science, we're obviously finding out newer and newer ways to handle it. But it also needs a kind of collective groundswell to make this happen. And I personally, there is a very interesting, I would say, extract which I read the other day, which somehow, as far as I am concerned, sums up this entire issue, which is basically a speculative fiction written by a writer called Octavia Butler, where she writes an essay about an imaginary conversation between a young man and a scientist. And she says that, okay, the young man challenged, so what's the answer? There isn't one, I told him. No answer. You mean we are doomed? He smiled as though he thought this might be a joke. No, I said. I mean, there's no single answer that will solve all our future problems. There's no magic bullet. Instead, there are thousands of answers, at least. You can be one of them if you choose to be. So I think that kind of sums up the whole spirit of how we will handle this problem which actually engulfs our planet. So thank you everybody once again, and I would request Indrani to close the session.
Thank you, Shanton. Thank you, all the speakers today. They have been scintillating, and we have really enjoyed the session. But actually, from my side, I would like to thank the Department of Environmental Science of Nistarini College, without whom we could not have arranged this webinar today. And I would also like to thank a few teachers from the Department of Computer Science who have set up the whole hardware so that the webinar could be held in peace. So thank you all, and we look forward to more meetings like this in the future. And of course, the discussions will never end. So we will continue it later on again. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Once again.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.